Yo, peace and love, peace and love. This is a remix of my last video. I'm doing an extended kind of remix of my video because the last video I did, which I thought I did a good job, I kind of uh, wanted to expand, and I had got feedback from the individual that I featured in the video. They wasn't very comfortable with being mentioned, So I'm just doing this as a courtesy, Wasn't that there was anything wrong or anything inaccurate about the video. The individual just, we on good terms, so I didn't want to just put that person out there. But we got the street Sufi here, aka Brother Ngozi, and we just gonna do a brief video just touching on recent events, the DNA, and also population turnover in the Levant. So here's the article from Haaretz. It says, in first, archaeologists extract DNA of ancient Israelites. And it says, for the first time, ancient DNA has been recovered from the bodies of ancient Israelites living in the first temple period. It says, the highlight of this very partial results is that the Y chromosome in the man belongs to the J2 haplogroup, a group of closely related DNA sequences that is believed to have originated in the Caucasus or Eastern Anatolia, a vast area including modern-day Turkey, northwest Iran, Armenia, Georgia, a word I'm not going to attempt to butcher right here. I'm not going to mess up this word. I'm not even going to say it. It says, in southern Russia. And if we look at Western Asia under distribution, we can see that some Jews definitely carry it. We got Sephardic Jews having it in the study, 15%. Ashkenazi Jews having the same amount. So we definitely see J2 amongst modern Jews. Down here it says, as for the mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited from the maternal side, the two individuals at Kiryat Yerim displayed two different haplogroups. One, T1A, is a very ancient ancestral haplogroup with similar counterparts already found in individuals living in Jordan some 10,000 years ago, and in southeastern Europe around 7,000 years ago, says Schaus. In later samples, it is found in Iran and in those Canaanite samples in Israel, as well as all the way up to the Baltic and Ural Mountains. And then it says the second one, called H87, hasn't been previously detected in ancient DNA samples, but it is found in modern-day Basques, Tunisians, Arabs, and Iraqi. So what were your thoughts when this came out?
Alhamdulillah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I thought it was good. You know what I'm saying? I thought it makes sense about the story of the beautiful Middle East. It's a zone of confluence. It has a continuation of a continuity of genetic affinity that's been shared in those areas for a very long time. So the story of the Middle East is what we see today. The story of the Middle East and the population that we see in the Middle East are remnants of what this was, you know, in the Iron Age and in the Bronze Age, you know.
And he's saying this is the first time ancient DNA has been recovered from the bodies of ancient Israelites. So they seem to be pretty confident that you can designate this as Israelite. And I know,
Yes, and it also falls in line with a clear story of the population that made up the Israelites, in the sense of it falls in line with, we see now that the Israelites were a population of people that were related to the other Canaanite, or the people of the Canaan that was already there, the Canaanite population. And they just represent a small subset of people who disconnected away from the other population because a lot of changes that was going on in that area. At one time, Egypt governed over some portions of it. There was a lot of issues going on with different situations, especially during the time when Egypt governed over Canaan. Then you have the Philistines, or who we know now, that was distinct from these populations, who were more closer to the sea people that came from Crete, related to the early Greeks. Um, and then we have an idea with just looking at it, we can see now that the Israelites was nothing but, a group of people who were already related to the populations that were there, and they have a stronger history from populations that came in even before their inception in the Iron Age, but even the earlier roots from populations coming from the Lesser Caucasus near Armenia and Iran, drifting over there 6,500 years ago. and the Bronze Age. Because even when you study this area, you have a continuity of populations wandering in and out for a very long time. Like when you look at the Natufians, like the earlier phase of the Natufians is Natufian hunter gatherers before they became a settlement of farmers, when they were just going in and out of farming in their earlier hunter gatherer phase. They represent the Cambrian population who were offshoots of the Levantine Agrigetian culture, who came from the earlier. They have Harriet culture. So when you look up the Natufian, if you go to preceded by, you can see the population that they come from. You can see
Preceded by Kabarian and
right now,
Mushabi
right now. Okay, Cabrian and who? Say it again.
and, and Mushabian.
And the Mushabians are populations who came out of Egypt. These ancient Egyptian populations, early Egyptian populations that drifted out and then went over there and mixed with the Cambrians. If you go to the Mushabians, look at what it says and read their history, and you can see
Yeah,
what's
I'm on
going
it right
on.
now. Okay. They said the
Now go to
culture
where
is
it
named
says go to under according to, read what it says.
according to Bar Yosef, a
Hmm.
contemporary desertic entity was labeled Mushabian and was
Hmm.
considered to be on the basis of the techno typological features. So that's what it's based on, the techno typological features of its lithics. Lithics is stone, right?
Hmm.
Of North African origin. The
So
okay.
we're gonna stop right there. You go further down, it's gonna prove the case more and more. It's a little bit above this
Oh yeah,
postulation.
Levy, where it says the Mushabian is commonly considered to have originated in North Africa, largely on the basis of habitual of the microburin technique and general morphological similarities with some assemblages in Nubia.
Okay, and then it also says something about them being related to the Ibero-Maurusians because they are nothing. These are
Yeah,
nothing but
Eric
Eastern.
Delson. He said a different industry, the Mushabian, is
Hmm.
marked by steeply arced microliths and frequent use of microburin technique. The Mushabian is found exclusively in the arid interior southern Levant, like Sinai,
Uh-huh.
suggesting it could represent an arid land adaptation. Some researchers have noted the stylistic continuities between the Mushabian and the Ibero-Maurusian of North
Boom.
Africa,
False. That's
suggesting
all
they
we
may
need.
represent
That's
a
all we need.
migration. No, wait, let me read this. Suggesting the Mushabian may represent a migration of African groups into the southern Levant.
There you go.
Stop
So
right
we got that. We got this drifting population, and you got to remember that Ibero-Maurusians were already a combined situation. They represent the Duzada population, or Duzana population, or Duzana that came from the Caucasus, who went through the Caucasus, or these early, very close to the Riverine culture, who drifted up, and you start to find them in the Duzudat or Duzana culture, whatever, hunter gatherer, because my mind's everywhere, who brought mtDNA U6 in, who mixed with the indigenous population who were close to Hadza like, in some layers that's something like Yoruba like, but those layers are really something classified in the field of genetics as ancestral North African. And the early ancestral North Africans were pretty much the Tyrians, who were close to Hadza like people. When Hadza like people are close to non-African like populations, or became out of Africa populations. So these Mushabians, earlier ancestors in some layers, is close to the Comarusians. And this is who brought the haplogroup E1B1B into the Levant. The E1B1B, in a sense of EZ827, which mutated into the independent EM123, and the predecessor root of E1B1A and E1B1B. I want to explain a little bit about this, the line that the Mushabians brought over there. They come from some layers of the Cormarusians, and they brought the E3B over there, which split from EZ827 that mutated into EM123. And the other layer they brought was the E1B1, which is the predecessor of EV38 and EM215. They brought that over there and mixed with the Cambrian population. Now look at the Cambrians and look at who they were preceded by.
Okay, the Cabrians were preceded by Amharian and Levantine Argnasian.
Now go to Levantine Agrigetian or Argnasian and see the
Okay.
direction that.
They have them right there in the Levant. Let me see. Uh, it evolved from the Emmerin culture. It was
Now
named because yeah.
now go to the immigrant culture. Now this immigrant culture are the populations who were close of the out of Africa population. They come from the later Assyrians who drifted out of Africa 70,000 to 80,000 years ago, and they became aboriginal to that portion of the Levant, and they later on adapted.
Okay, so you said this culture existed in the Levant between the middle and the upper Paleolithic periods. It is the oldest known of the upper Paleolithic cultures and remains an enigma as it transitionally has no clear African progenitor. Right there.
Right, but if
That's
you follow who they're preceded by, look at who they're preceded by. You can see where they're
okay.
coming from. This is
It
CT.
has
This is
my bad.
CTM168. This is CTM168 and mtDNA L3 or N, which left out through North Africa and went over there. But look at who they're preceded by.
You have a Tyrian and Mousterian.
And those are ancient North Africans, which is the ancestral North Africans. So it's a two-way street. An earlier population of these people that go into the Levant and become Aboriginal and later become the Cambrians, and then a later group of these North Africans who came back a little bit mixed through populations that crossed the Mediterranean, mixed with the Zuzana population, fused into them, and then they turned around and integrated into these Cambrians.
Because I know you pressed for time, I want to get into this population turnover. So I'm on the wiki page for Natufians, and of course I've showed this in the last video. But these, the samples that they found there were E, and this is the Neolithic, correct? This is about what, 10,000, 11,000 years ago.
Correct.
And it would have so the Natufians that they found, they were E pretty much. They were E1. They had one E1B1, which is the
Right, and remember when we start getting into these genetics right here, this is the Tufians was a combination already between Cambrian and Mushabians. That's all. So this E is what you're seeing coming from the Mushabians. That's what I was just trying to explain.
So you got E1B1 and you got E1B1B. Now, at some point prior to the whole biblical narrative, there's a turnover, or there's an influx of people who later get associated with the Canaanites, or they all mix together, and that happens. The whole population turnover thing. How does that come about? Can you let's get into that?
Well, they dominate over there. The fragmented pre-pottery Neolithic and offshoots of Natufians start to, it's a bottleneck on them, a reduction of their population. The people come in and dominate over the territory.
And this will
Happens
happen when?
This happens between 6,500 years ago. So E starts to decrease. Some of those E's or later clades of E3B even found refugium back in Africa. Some of these people become the pastoralist cults drifting into Africa, finding refugium all the way down through Kenya. That's why when they look at the ancient Kenyan pastoralists, they find that Natufian like signature in them. But they always found Africa as a refugium, especially North Africa in North Sudan and a Horn as refugium of populations going backwards and forward, which this is why in some cases you can see Egypt and some portions of Israel or the Levant and some portions of Arabia as greater Africa.
You had put me on to Razib Khan where he was talking about, I'm just going to read this small part. This is from his Canaanite Walk Among Us genetic edition. He said, additionally buried in this preprint is evidence of major Y chromosomal turnover. We've seen this before. The prominence of haplogroup J in Bronze Age and modern Levantines seems to be due to Eastern farmer migration.
Correct.
And he said, adding to J and R together, we get the inference that more than half the paternal lineages of Lebanese today are not from Western farmers native to the area. So yeah, let's get into this. So you mentioned that people would have came in. Of course, they would have came in with the J. They're coming from that Caucasus region, and before the biblical narrative actually pops off, you have those people already there.
Correct.
And would these people be tied to this article right here?
Later on they set up in different groups. So what I'm saying is that these people did the same shit we did. They was the same people, just created different groups of people later on. They got a few tweaks in between because different people kept adapting and developing later mutations and kept migrating in the same zones. But most of the affinity was continuous and shared. There was a continuity with those Bronze Age into the Iron Age populations.
Now they got an article right here about 6,500-year-old culture in Israel brought by migrants, and some of them, not all, of course, some of them had fair skin and blue eyes from
Yeah,
Iran.
yeah,
So
yeah.
this
They
would
would
have
have
been the
had.
Copper Age Chalcolithic, right?
Yeah, some of them would have had fair skin, blue eyes. And even when you go to Palestine today, all Palestinians are not swarthy olive skin. Some of these people can have, light skin and blue eyes. That's not the issue. So you're gonna see that. You got to remember a lot of these tweets and mutation starts in the Middle East, even before going into Europe. So looking like that isn't the problem, especially coming from that Turkey, Iran, and Lesser Caucasus area. A lot of those shifts and mutations start there before even spreading in Europe or even spreading into the rest of the West Asia or the Middle East. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, so just to finish up the article, they were saying that there was no, because some people have cast it down. We don't know if this was an Israelite or not, but we can't. They are, obviously they're gonna say that, but the article actually mentions how people would probably have that skepticism because it says that they didn't have any Hebrew inscriptions that confirmed that they were Israelites, but the pottery assemblage was typical of what was found in the late temple burial periods in Jerusalem, and that it had proximity to the capital of Judah, so that would suggest that those people could be considered Hebrews. And
Yes,
then
and this is when you can't just rely on genetics or anthropology. You got to also rely on
material culture.
you got to also rely on archaeology. And then when you get in the field of archaeology and you study pottery and different things, you could tell the difference between the Canaanite pottery, like my brother How Music presented. You could tell the difference between Canaanite pottery and Israelite. Israelite pottery didn't have any writing on it. You see what I'm saying? Compared to the Canaanite pottery, Israelite pottery probably was designed like Canaanite pottery, but the Israelite pottery didn't have the writing. And if they did have a writing, you'll see a star, Dawood, Prophet Dawood, peace be upon him, aka David, peace be upon him, on there. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they was talking in this article right here. I mentioned ancient mitochondrial DNA. This one right here. This talked about the pottery too. Let me see if I can briefly re-mention it. Um, real quick. Yeah, they said bowls. Bowls was the most frequent vessel type in the assemblage, and under here, they said the one with the outfolded rim, which are the most common bowl type in Iron Age 2, B to C, Judah. The bowls found in the cave better resemble vessels of this type found in the 701 BC destruction layers, and that references Lachish. Lachish was, Judah when the Assyrians destroyed that. So, yeah, just looking at the pottery at the time, it represents like the kind of pottery those people would have been using. So towards the end of the article, it says it's too early to draw conclusions based on the limited data from a single sample. It is of note that the first temple period individual still carried the same genetic variations that the Canaanites displayed centuries earlier, which they had inherited from the Caucasian newcomers. Those Caucasian newcomers that gave them that, of course, now we were talking about it, those would have been the people migrating from the Caucasus regions and Iran and Turkey and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Abraham, one of the locations that people say or Chaldees is postulated is somewhere not too far from that region,
Uh-huh.
somewhere possibly in Turkey.
Uh-huh.
So I just wanted to make this point because, to be fair, the article says, as limited as it is, we can't ignore this piece of evidence that there's a connection. And he said it's not a complete surprise because we have evidence from other lines of inquiry. And he said we cannot say if this is representative of the entire population. And I agree because, I mean, you just got a J2 sample, you have a H8, you have a T. If a larger study is done on known Israelite specimens, I suspect that there will be some J1s, some Rs, some haplogroup T, and definitely
Some H.
some lingering E1B1B,
Yes, and some H.
some
Yes.
H, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
of course we can't just look at that and say, of course we're not going to say that's all of it,
Correct.
but I'm pretty confident if they were, you would definitely see a continuity. It just the evidence is just leaning there. And for people who trying to make the whole E1B1A thing, there's
They don't.
evidence.
I don't. I don't think they have a place. We don't have a place in that. And not say we because I'm E1B1A. I'm not trying to be that. Not saying that E1B1A is a brother to E1B1B, and we both split from E1B1. But we got our own history where we come from. And I'm not saying nowhere down the line you may not find because they found some E1B1A in ancient France a long time ago. But that's way before the establishment of what we see that becomes. Um, um, these cultures and civilizations. So I wouldn't bait on upper Paleolithic populations or further populations because E1B1A was not the predominant marker in sub-Saharan Africa 8,000 years ago, not yet alone 7,000 years ago. A lot of us were people that came from the Sahara North, like that's coming from Onanian people like the Kefians who drifted down and mingled with the populations of South West African hunter-gatherers and different groups to become these later people who created these later derived ethnic groups. And ethnicity can come and go. Everybody know that if you study people and populations. So I'm not baiting for E1B1A to be outside of the zones that it's in. If E1B1A is found, it'll be probably highly found primarily in ancient further North Africa, especially in the early Green Sahara and in the Sahel zones and different places.
Man,
And you might even find some in drifting to a lesser extent in even Arabia at one time. But far as with this, I'm not baiting that. You will find a higher concentration of E1B1B because our E1B1B brothers within Yap or the Lu kept going north. They were the ones who went further north and really dominated the Mediterranean and even went out of the continent and drifted into the Balkans and all types of places, doing a lot of things. Not saying that a few wandering E1B1A didn't go with them, but you're going to really find to a higher extent E3B. But when it comes to us and our later downstream mutations of E1B1A, we have nothing to do with that. We have beautiful history and complex history in the tropical zones of Africa that we come from, and we really should embrace that. Not saying we can't embrace the Middle East because I love the Middle East. I'm a Muslim. But what I'm saying is I also embrace iron, iron that we dealt with, the iron smiting, pottery that we dealt with in the Sahel, even the method of Bantu farming that developed within our own individual cultivation that we shaped within ourselves because of survival. Farming started in more than one spot. So we don't have to wait for a Middle Eastern person, and we don't even have to wait for a motherfucker from Papua New Guinea, or even the ancient Native Americans in Mexico had a form of farming. They didn't come in contact with nobody. They developed it later, but they didn't come in contact with no Anatolian and none of that. So to try to be these people is disgusting. You can respect the people and love the culture without trying to be them, but live according to what the principles of what you feel that they offer you to make you a better person. That's what you need to be doing instead of saying, "Oh, that was me." No, your direct line don't have no ties to that. We have our own unique, beautiful ties for what we did as a people.
Mm. So I got the Kefians up right quick, and they were in the Sahara Desert, and they I said they have existed between 8,000 to 6,000 BC in the Sahara Desert near the during the African human period. Um, and they say human remains from this culture were found in 2000 at Gobero, located in Niger, in the Tenere Desert, and they talk about them being hunters. They were tall, they were over 6 feet in height, and craniometric analysis suggests that this early Holocene population was related to late Pleistocene Ibero-Maurusians and early Holocene Capsians of the Maghreb.
Now go to the part where it says
I'm going right to it.
based.
Based on dental evidence,
Uh-huh.
Joel D. Irish of Liverpool John Moores University suggests sub-Saharan West African affinities for the Kefians, in turn suggesting the common ancestors of West African and Proto-Bantu peoples may have originated in the southwestern region of the Sahara amid the Kefian period at Gobero and migrated southward from the Sahara into various parts of West Africa, Benin, Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, as a result of desertification of the Green Sahara in 7,000 BC. Who was in the... So would you say that the ancestors of the African diaspora, EM2, E1B1A, they
That's
were
us. Those,
they were
those,
at
those,
the
those,
origin of
those
Green Sahara.
yes, those Kefians gave us that. They were the ones who gave us E1B1A and mixed with those old West African hunter gatherers who had ghost population genes with them. And the old West African hunter gatherers was a combination between ancient East African hunter gatherers that drifted over there 30,000 to 60,000 years ago, who mixed with populations who were like Jebel Hood in Morocco, who were archaic Homo sapiens, who we're classifying as ghost populations. And when we mix with them, this created who we are now. The combination of that.
So the ancestor population of African Americans, you could say that some of that would have been found in the Kefian culture,
Yes, yes,
this at these time periods, which is
yes.
still predating the Israelite period.
Absolutely. Hell yeah.
Yeah. And here's a this is ResearchGate, tracing the Bantu expansion from its source, dental non-metric affinities among West Africans and neighboring population. And it talks about the Bantu-speaking populations in sub-Saharan Africa, talks about the time period, right? And they used craniometrics or just dental. I know he used dental affinities for West
Hmm.
Africans, for
Hmm.
Bantu-speaking people. And this is dated to 8,000 years ago. Ain't no Abraham at this point.
No, hell no.
Yes. I'm just giving this source. I also want to reference real quick while you still here the Tichit culture, because when it comes to West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, we know that the hunter-gatherers, which were haplogroup A and B, those people were pretty much non-farming people for pretty much exactly. They weren't farming at all, really.
Right.
And the people who introduced farming or pioneered farming in the West Africa were the people who would be the Niger Congo speakers, Bantu speakers, basically the people, the E markers, the haplogroup E people, right?
This was independent. We did this. This is the uniqueness and beauty of us and our story.
All right,
This is us. This is not Middle East. This is our story right here. This
all
is
right.
what we need to embrace instead of trying to tie it with our brothers and sisters in the Middle East as human beings. Like every human being is great and gave the world something. And we need to respect our independence and what we did and contributed to the planet instead of
Okay.
trying to just merge it all together. You
So
know.
the Tichit culture, and this is just a wiki article just to give you all the overview, because all this stuff you should be researching on your own. Don't just take it just from us. I mean, when we reference stuff, read it for yourself. The Tichit culture was created by Proto-Mande peoples in 4000 BC, the start of the sophisticated social structure developed among herders amid the pastoral period of the Sahara. And it says by 1800 BC, Saharan pastoral culture expanded through the Saharan and Sahelian regions. Um, it talks about Dar Tichit. I'm gonna go to there. Dar Tichit. All right. And it said at Dar Tichit and Dar Walata, pearl millet may have also been independently domesticated amid the Neolithic. So they started domesticating pearl millet to eat. And at Dar Tichit right here, it's a Neolithic archaeological site in southwestern region of the Sahara Desert in Mauritania. It's part of the Tichit culture, right? And they were inhabited by farmers and pastoralists between 4500 BP and 2300 BP. They say it's one of the oldest archaeological occupation sites in West Africa. 500 settlements littered the region. Its inhabitants hunted, fished, and collected wild grain and grew bulrush millet. So there's some like early parts of a little bit of farming going on as far as certain crops here in West Africa. And these people, of course, they were not the hunter-gatherer people, because today the hunter-gatherer people largely still hunt and gather. They're not farmers. The few people that still do that. And it says this culture was created by Proto-Mande people. So the
Right.
Mande peoples, of course,
Monday people are the earliest phase of proto Niger Congo or Niger Congo speakers. In the Sahara, we were Nanians, but later on we become, the Mende. And the Mende is one of the base roots that's close to the earliest sets of Niger Congo. And if some people like to say it may not be Niger Congo, because of the tones, but it's still a brother branch. If it's not within the base of earlier Niger Congo, the tones slightly makes it distinct. But the tones is not the tone difference is because Mende branches of what they classify as Niger Congo or Latin Congo is much older than Benue Congo, which is the Bantu speakers. So either way, these people are the predecessor roots of even the Bantus in relation.
and
They're
these
the
dudes,
predecessor. They're the predecessor root. The Nook culture, the Mende culture, the people that became the Sanake or Wagadu, to all the way to the later Bantus that also had earlier ancestors that crossed through the Sahel and went through Niger and Mali before hitting Cameroon, dominating Cameroon and growing in numbers and creating different ethnic groups before further expansion. The base root of us starts at the northern tip of Mali. And before the northern tip of Mali, we're coming through the southern corpse of the early Green Sahara when you go to the Kefians before we later become this other later population. So our root starts between Mali and Niger.
Mm. So I got the Mende people up. This is the Britannica entry on the Mende. It says people of Sierra Leone, including a small group in Liberia, they speak a language of the Mande branch of Niger Congo family. So the Mende are Mande speaking people. So when it says what does it say up here? Let me go back to Proto Mande people. The Mende is one of those people that spread out. Niger Congo speakers, and the Mende, they grow rice, as well as yams and cassava. So we all know that the Mende and the Mande speakers, these are largely Icarian people. So what I mean to say when I bring this up in this time period is that West Africans, their ancestors were already present in West Africa, creating their own culture. They were trying to farm. They were doing their own thing. In the time period, see the time period, 4000 BC. This is independent of the Israelite, of the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age things that were going on in Israel, in the Levant. So you have E present already in Africa, in West Africa, in the Sahara already. So when people are trying to look and place themselves as far as their lineage in the Middle East, they should be looking at what their ancestors were already doing in Africa. So I appreciate you coming through, and I want to bring this last thing up to you. I had a Hebrew Israelite who wanted to cast aspersions on DNA. They don't agree with DNA. Of course, DNA that we've been talking about, it actually really just destroys a lot of the arguments that they've been making. It's from Lund University. It says studies reveal flaws in population genetic method. This right here, it says the most common analytical method within population genetics is deeply flawed according to a new study. And basically, they making a reference to El Hayek. Basically, they wanted to say that I got two articles. They were saying that the PCA method is flawed, and therefore you cannot trust genetics. And I wanted to break down what PCAs are, what the issues with PCAs are, and does it affect anything that we've said or any arguments we've made with genetics and haplogroups against the Israelite.
Well, the human genome has been mapped out since 2002 or 2003, so it's fairly new, but it also been completely mastered in 2020. I think they brought that out. So PCA, principal component analysis, it's, whether you have small errors or population bias based off the samples or the usage of it, it still gives you an idea of how things work or what things are highly. And a lot of people don't like the way their results are, so they complain and they find the flaws or the errors and say, "Oh, well, this." No, it still gives you an idea of whatever it is highly and
So this
understand
is
the population distance.
this criticism largely affects autosomal or connecting populations from ancient to modern, um,
Yeah.
that kind of thing,
Yes.
genetics. So it doesn't
Yes.
have any bearing on whether we on deep ancestral lineage when they find a result and determine, oh, this person has this lineage, which could be defined as E1B1B, and this person has something that can be defined as haplogroup R. It doesn't have any bearing on whether.
No, haplogroups can go unchanged and don't recombine. Haplogroups is your
Okay,
deep
so this
ancestral lineage that doesn't. Haplogroups is your deep ancestral lineage that makes up less than 1% of your DNA, but they're sex chromosomes that gives you an idea of your deep ancestral lineage.
So, in regard to the appeal to El Hayek's article criticizing PCA, it still has no bearing on genetics as a whole. And while we do need to take serious and find and perfect a method to better that instead of what they're doing right now with PCAs, it does not negate actual DNA as far as lineage, deep ancestral lineage like haplogroups. J still J, haplogroup E1B1A is still E1B1A, and they're not the same, and that's not what was found in that study. So any Hebrew Israelites appealing to this, I would take serious what is said about PCAs, but as far as haplogroups and lineages, it will not undo the fact that we have not found lineage amongst Israelite samples in any kind of major way for them to make their argument with genetics. So with that being said, I want to say thank you for watching. I know this video was kind of long. Peace and love.